millions of Americans and people around the world are taken to the streets, not for concerts, not for sports, but to protest against Donald Trump's government and what they see as the rise of an increasingly authoritarian America. Under one slogan, "No Kings," people from coast to coast are gathering to make their voices heard. They're saying loud and clear, "We're not alone, we won't be silenced, and we refuse to be ruled." It's not just a few rallies here and there. According to The Guardian, there are over 2,500 protests happening across the U.S. under the No Kings banner. That's not a movement anymore. That's a message. And that message is simple. America was never meant to have a king. See, the phrase "No Kings" hits deep in American history. This nation was literally born out of a revolution against monarchy, against the idea that one man could hold absolute power. But today, many fear that Donald Trump is trying to crown himself the new monarch of America just without the gold crown and the British accent. Trump's critics argue that his second-term ambitions are clear. He doesn't want to govern the country. He wants to control it. And for millions of Americans, that's the nightmare scenario. Because the last time the world saw this kind of strongman energy, it didn't end well. Not with Mussolini, not with Stalin, and definitely not with Hitler. The No Kings protests have become the biggest show of resistance since Trump's return to power, and it's shaking the foundations of American democracy. But here's the terrifying question on everyone's mind. What if Trump uses these protests as an excuse to declare martial law? That's not paranoia. That's a scenario experts are already warning about. There are reports, unconfirmed but spreading fast, that Trump could invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 during the nationwide No Kings Day protest on October 18, 2025. If that happens, it would give him the legal power to deploy the military on U.S. soil, to label protesters as domestic terrorists, and to suppress dissent in the name of national order. Think about that. A president using a 200-year-old law to turn America's streets into a battlefield. It sounds like dystopian fiction, but in Trump's America, fiction and reality are getting harder to tell apart. The question now isn't whether Americans will resist. It's whether their democracy can survive the resistance. So here's where things get darker. Millions are marching under the No Kings banner, but behind closed doors, whispers are growing louder. People are asking the same chilling question. Is Trump planning to use these protests as a reason to impose martial law? Sounds dramatic? Maybe. But here's the problem. The pieces are already on the board. A viral video from political influencer Chris Valenti recently broke the internet. In it, he claims, Donald Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 on October 18, 2025, during the No Kings Day protest. It'll be the largest protest in U.S. history, followed by the declaration of martial law. The administration will label protesters as Antifa, and the FBI, CIA, and ICE will arrest as many as possible. Now, is that conspiracy theory or insider warning? Even if it's half true, it's terrifying, because we've seen this movie before. Authoritarian leaders always need a spark. One moment of chaos, one violent clash, one incident, and suddenly, democracy is put on pause, and Trump's allies, they're already laying the groundwork. The governor of Texas, one of Trump's most loyal followers, has announced he's ready to deploy the National Guard to confront left-wing radicals. In his words, these protests are linked to Antifa. Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson took to the podium to call these gatherings assemblies of America haters, Marxists, and Antifa sympathizers, and he's not alone. Republicans across the board have been echoing the same talking points, even before the protests begin. Let that sink in. They're calling people terrorists before a single march has even happened. That's not law and order. That's narrative control. It's how regimes justify violence before the first bullet is fired. Analysts are warning Trump's team is pre-framing the protests as national threats so that when things escalate, in whether by accident or design, he can legally unleash federal power. And here's where it gets even more alarming. Pam Bondi, Trump's former attorney general, has publicly stated that the president has every right to invoke the Insurrection Act. Her justification? alleged riots in Chicago, riots that, according to multiple reports, never actually happened. All it would take is one protest out of 2,500 turning violent, and Trump would have his excuse. He wouldn't just respond to chaos. He'd create it. If this feels like a setup, that's because it probably is. It's not just about silencing dissent. It's about transforming civil unrest into political opportunity. So the question isn't if Trump will act, it's when and how far he's willing to go. Here's where things go from political to downright dystopian. While millions of Americans prepare to protest under the NoKings banner, the Trump administration is planning something else for the very same weekend, a massive military show of force in Southern California. Yeah, you heard that right. On the same day as the largest protest movement in modern American history, the U.S. military is scheduled to conduct a live-fire exercise near Camp Pendleton, including an amphibious landing and aerial bombardment along the California coastline. That's not symbolism, that's intimidation. The story first broke through independent outlet Midas Touch and was later confirmed by California Governor Gavin Newsom. Officially, the drill is meant to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Marine Corps. But let's be real. Timing is everything. The plans were so extreme that Interstate 5, the most important north-south highway on the West Coast, was reportedly set to be shut down for safety reasons during the exercise. That's the same highway thousands of protesters would be using to travel to NoKings rallies across California. A weird coincidence or a perfectly timed disruption? After public outrage and a wave of backlash from California officials, the Marines walked it back, saying the exercise would no longer require the closure of the highway. How convenient. But here's the uncomfortable question. If journalists hadn't exposed the plan, would the military have gone ahead and shut it down? Because we've seen this playbook before, not just in history books, but in living memory. Dictators often mask real mobilizations as training exercises until suddenly the troops aren't training anymore. You can call it paranoia, but patterns don't lie. Every authoritarian move starts with coincidences that turn out not to be coincidences at all. This isn't about a military parade or national pride. It's about normalizing the presence of force, getting Americans used to the sight of tanks, troops, and helicopters hovering over domestic protests. And the message behind that display is loud and clear. We have the power. Don't push back. The tension is rising, the protests are growing, and the line between drill and deployment has never looked thinner. At this point, the protests aren't just about democracy anymore. They're about survival. Across social media, NoKings organizers are sounding the alarm. They're telling people, stay calm, don't engage, watch for infiltrators. They know what's coming. They know that all it takes is one spark, one planted agitator, one broken window, one scuffle caught on camera, and the entire movement could be branded as violent extremism, because that's the playbook. You create chaos, then you use it to crush dissent. And Trump's people, they're playing that game perfectly. Take a look at Trump's decision to continue paying military salaries despite a government shutdown. At first glance, it looks patriotic, supporting the troops. But to many analysts, it's a clear sign of something else. Trump is buying loyalty. He's ensuring that when push comes to shove, the armed forces will stand with him, not the Constitution. And lurking behind all of this, like a ghost haunting American politics, is Stephen Miller. If you don't know his name, you should. Stephen Miller isn't just another Trump advisor. He's the ideological architect of Trumpism itself. He's the man who helped shape policies that ripped migrant children from their parents. He's the strategist who turned fear, hate, and nationalism into political currency. And lately, Miller's rhetoric has gone full-on apocalyptic. He's been talking about bloodbaths to imaginary massacres supposedly caused by Democrats and Antifa, and promising revenge. This isn't campaign language, it's war language. One senior analyst called Miller the American face of fascism in a tailored suit. And that's not hyperbole. Miller has openly embraced ideas that echo 1930s authoritarian propaganda, framing political opposition not as debate, but as enemy occupation. Now imagine a man like that whispering into Trump's ear while millions protest across the nation. Imagine what kind of solutions he's suggesting. And here's the punchline. Miller doesn't even hide it. He laughs about it. He posts about America's enemies on social media like he's narrating a movie where he's the hero and democracy is the villain. If this were just fringe talk, we could ignore it. But when the man who wrote Trump's immigration policies starts talking about cleansing the country of his political enemies, that's not Twitter noise anymore. That's a red flag waving in front of the entire world. Because fascism doesn't come back overnight. It comes back through men like Stephen Miller. One whisper, one law, one order at a time. Right now, millions of Americans are preparing to march, not knowing what might happen next. For many of them, the danger isn't theoretical. It's personal. They know that their own government, the one that's supposed to protect them, is waiting for a reason to strike back. And that's the part that breaks your heart. People are heading into the streets fully aware that one wrong move, one push, one scuffle, one misstep could give Donald Trump everything he needs to declare martial law. Some are saying it openly. If anything happens, they'll call us terrorists. They'll send the army after us. Let that sink in. When citizens believe their government might unleash its own military against them, that's not democracy anymore. That's a government on the edge of war with its people. And here's the terrifying truth. Under martial law, Trump could delay elections, limit press freedom, and ban public gatherings in the name of security. He'd hold the power to rewrite the political landscape overnight. For a man who's obsessed with loyalty and control, that's the ultimate temptation, and he's not hiding it. He wants that power. He's been flirting with it publicly, talking about how a strong leader needs to restore order. Analysts are warning that Trump could use martial law to suspend the 2026 midterms, preventing another electoral defeat for his party. It's the oldest authoritarian trick in the book. Change the rules before the game ends. But here's the tragedy. So many Americans still believe the country can simply ride it out, that no matter how bad it gets, the system will hold. Because after all, America survived Trump once, right? But this time, things are different. This isn't the same Trump we saw in 2016. This is Trump unchained, surrounded by loyalists, insulated from accountability, and armed with lessons from his first term. One political scientist put it bluntly, the United States is one shove away from the fall of democracy. Think about that image. A nation that's just one shove, one spark, one violent moment away from breaking its own foundation. The NoKings protests aren't just about a man or a movement. They're about whether America can still look in the mirror and recognize itself. Because if martial law comes, it won't just silence protesters. It will redraw the meaning of freedom itself. As America stands at the edge of a political meltdown, something remarkable is happening beyond its borders. And across Europe, Germany, and other parts of the world, people are taking to the streets in solidarity with the NoKings movement. From Berlin to Frankfurt, from Bremen to Nuremberg, protesters are holding up signs that read, "No kings, no dictators, no Trump." They're not doing it because they think they can change Washington. They're doing it because they understand something most Americans forget. When democracy dies in the United States, it trembles everywhere else. Germany, a country that knows the price of dictatorship better than most, has seen new waves of activism under the banner Omas gegen Rechts, grandmothers against the far right. They're not just activists, they're survivors. They've seen what happens when good people stay silent while power grows unchecked. One upcoming event in Munich, a gathering called Faces Against Fascism, is encouraging people to literally show their faces for democracy. The message is clear. You can't fight authoritarianism by hiding. You fight it by showing up, and this spirit is spreading. Social movements around the world are realizing that Trumpism isn't just an American problem. It's a global virus. It feeds on anger, fear, and misinformation. It mutates into local versions, from Europe's far-right parties to nationalist movements in Latin America and Asia. The fight against it has to be global, too, because when people in Berlin or Munich march in solidarity with Americans, they're not just helping the U.S., they're defending the idea of democracy itself, that fragile promise that government should serve the people, not the other way around. Meanwhile, inside the U.S., Activists are calling for calm, but also connection. They are urging Americans not to isolate themselves in fear, but to find strength in community. To see that resistance isn't just about protest signs, it's about building bonds strong enough to outlast one man's grip on power. Even if Trump manages to weaponize the law or the military, he can't control solidarity. He can't legislate compassion. He can't outlaw hope. And that's why movements like NoKings matter, because they remind the world that democracy isn't just a system, it's a shared act of courage. So here we are. The world is watching. Millions are marching. And Donald Trump, a man who once claimed to be the law and order president, is flirting with the end of law and order itself. No one knows how the next few weeks will unfold. When this video drops, we may already be in the middle of it. The NoKings protests, the government response, maybe even something darker. But one thing's for sure, America is standing at a crossroads. On one side, fear, control, and the slow death of democracy. On the other, courage, community, and the belief that freedom is still worth fighting for. Even now, Trump's administration is testing the boundaries of power. Reports suggest his advisors are debating emergency measures, restrictions on the press, expanded surveillance, new rules limiting unlawful assemblies. Each one sounds small on paper. Together, they paint a very different picture, a democracy under siege from within. And yet, amidst all the chaos, people keep showing up. Students, veterans, teachers, parents, ordinary Americans who still believe the Constitution means something. Because in the end, it's not Trump who decides what happens next. It's us. Democracy doesn't fall in a single night. It erodes piece by piece until one day you wake up and realize the rules have changed. But here's the thing. If democracy can erode, it can also be rebuilt. The protests aren't just acts of defiance, they're acts of preservation. Every person who takes to the streets, who speaks up, who refuses to look away, they're holding up the fragile bridge between chaos and freedom. So, as the nation braces for what's coming, remember this: the most dangerous thing we can do right now is nothing. If the NoKings movement has shown us anything, it's that silence is complicity. You don't have to agree on every policy, every party, or every protest chant, but you do have to stand for democracy. Because once it's gone, it's not coming back easily. So stay alert, stay informed, stay united, and above all, stay loud. Because the moment we stop speaking out is the moment America stops being America.